There is a secret I have kept for nearly 20 years, and only now do I have the courage to say it out loud. I am 74 years old. I have been divorced for almost 2 decades. And if you think the hardest part after divorce is loneliness, an empty house, evenings with no one waiting for you, I thought so too. But I was wrong. The thing that exhausted me the most, the thing that lingered the longest, was not living alone. It was no longer knowing how to say who I was. People would ask gently the kind of polite questions everyone hears. Where is your wife? How is your family these days? And I would stand there. I wasn't panicking. I wasn't in pain. I just froze. Saying I'm divorced sounded like a belated confession. Saying I live alone sounded like I was avoiding the truth. Saying more than that made everything feel unnecessarily heavy. There was no phrase that felt neutral enough, no wording that allowed me to feel like I hadn't failed. It was strange. I was no longer sad about a marriage that had ended long ago. But every time I had to answer that question, I felt myself shrink just a little. That was when I experienced the first turn, though I didn't have a name for it at the time. I thought I was simply avoiding an awkward question. But in truth, I was avoiding facing my own life after divorce. I told myself silence was polite. I told myself changing the subject was wise. I believed that if I didn't say it out loud, everything would be fine. I didn't realize that from that moment on, that silence would begin following me into every room, every conversation, until it slowly became part of who I was. After the first time I couldn't answer that question, I started to notice how much I was avoiding. At first it was subtle. At a gathering of old friends, someone laughed and casually asked, "Your wife didn't come with you," I answered indirectly. I said she was busy. I said she didn't like crowded events. I offered something that sounded reasonable and quickly turned the question back on them. Another time in a doctor's waiting room, a neighbor I recognized sat next to me and asked, "Your family doing well?" I nodded. I said, "Fine." I didn't add anything else. I felt my heart beat a little faster, but I told myself it was nothing. Then came family gatherings. Relatives asked more directly, not with malice, just normal curiosity. I smiled awkwardly. I changed the subject. I stood up to get more water. I did everything except answer the question. Each time I reassured myself. I told myself I was just being polite, that there was no need to pull others into my private life, that I had already moved past that marriage, that there was nothing left to say. But if I truly had moved past it, why did such a simple question make me stumble every time I tried different approaches? Sometimes I vaguely said I lived alone. Sometimes I said the children were grown and had lives of their own. Sometimes I stayed completely silent and let the pause drift by. What was strange was that I didn't do this because I was still in love or because I regretted leaving. I didn't want to go back. I wasn't in pain over the past. What stopped me each time I opened my mouth was the feeling that if I named the truth correctly, I would have to admit I had failed at something very big. There was no label that felt safe enough. Divorced sounded like a crack. Single sounded like avoidance. Living alone sounded incomplete. So I chose the easiest path. I avoided it. I remember once smiling to myself and thinking, I'm just dodging a question, what's the big deal? But then I began to realize those moments of avoidance didn't stand alone. They connected. They repeated. And every time I felt myself fade a little more from my own life story. I no longer clearly said who I was. I only said who I was not. I was not a married man. I was not part of a complete family. But I also didn't dare say I was someone who had lived through a collapse. I thought I was only avoiding awkwardness. I didn't know that the more I avoided it, the further I drifted from myself. And that was when I began to sense something that frightened me. It wasn't that other people didn't know who I was. It was that I myself, day by day, felt less certain of the answer. That night, she said a very short sentence. No tears, no accusations. She just looked at me and said, "I've waited long enough." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't anger. It was simply a conclusion. And I nodded. I didn't argue. I didn't reach out. In that moment, our marriage ended. Not because of betrayal, not because of violence, not because of any dramatic mistake, but because there were too many times I wasn't there when she needed me. Too many times I stayed silent and told myself everything would be fine. I used to believe divorce was what I was ashamed of, the greatest stain on my life. But the longer I lived with the truth, the more I realized I had misnamed my pain. I am not ashamed that we divorced. I am ashamed that I allowed a relationship to slowly die without having the courage to stop earlier or to change while there was still time. I am ashamed that I watched her grow tired day after day and still chose to believe silence was safe. I told myself that not arguing meant things were fine, that no conflict meant maturity. That was the biggest lie I ever believed. I say this to myself now, not to punish myself, but to confess I confused peace with surrender, patience with indifference. I thought I was a good man simply because I didn't do anything wrong. But I didn't do anything right either. I didn't ask. I didn't listen all the way through. I didn't stop when things first began to crack. And when she finally left, I realized that what had kept my head bowed for nearly 20 years was not the word divorce. It was not knowing how to tell that story truthfully. I stayed silent because I was afraid of being judged, afraid of being called a failure. But the truth is, this silence is not politeness. Silence is erasing yourself from your own life story. And today I choose not to do that anymore. I accept that I was wrong. I accept that a part of my life ended in regret. And if you are still listening, perhaps the rest of this story is no longer about me. It is about you and about the things you may still be able to name. There is one lesson I wish I had understood sooner. Not about marriage, not about divorce, but about how people slowly disappear from their own lives simply because they are afraid of being labeled. We are taught many things: how to begin, how to endure, how to keep going. But almost no one teaches us how to end a chapter with kindness toward ourselves. So we choose silence. We tell ourselves silence is polite, mature, considerate. But prolonged silence is not peace. It is a way of removing yourself from life. The perspective I want to share with you today is very simple. Shame is not about what you have been through. Shame is about how long you let it define your worth. Divorce, loss, failure, and unfinished beginning, those are not your identity. They are only chapters. And no chapter, no matter how painful, has the right to write the entire book. If you are listening right now, you may also have a story you've been afraid to tell, something you avoid whenever someone asks. I'm not telling you to make it public. I only hope you don't continue to disappear. Leave a comment if this story touched you or if you've carried something difficult to name. Press like if it made you feel less alone. And subscribe to this channel if you want to keep listening to stories that are honest, slow, and deeply human. Perhaps the next story will feel a lot like your own.